The first sound you hear isn't birdsong or the laughter of children. It's the low, menacing growl of a diesel engine at idle. A massive yellow bulldozer, its bucket glinting maliciously in the early morning sun, is parked on the street, squared off against the perfectly manicured lawn of an otherwise peaceful-looking home. The red and blue lights of two police cruisers flash silently, painting ghostly streaks of color across white siding and carefully tended marigolds. The air is thick with tension, and there, on the sidewalk, is the queen of this particular drama, Carolyn Beaumont. Her blonde hair is in a perfect bun, her beige pantsuit is wrinkle-free, and the smile on her face is equal parts honey and ice. She stands with her arms crossed, staring down the man standing alone on his porch. That man is Jack Callahan. He isn't physically imposing, but there's a solidity to him, a stillness forged in places most people only have nightmares about. His shoulders are square, his gaze is level, and he just stands there, hands loose at his sides, a portrait of quiet defiance. Carolyn speaks, her voice sharp as a razor's edge, loud enough for the police officers and the curious neighbors peeking through their blinds to hear. This is what happens when you don't comply, Mr. Callahan. Rules are rules. Our community has standards. Jack doesn't flinch. He just gives a slight nod, a tiny movement freighted with contempt. Your standards, Mrs. Beaumont, are not the law. Carolyn's smile tightens. Oh, we'll see about that. Tear it down. But to understand how a beautiful morning in a suburb named Serenity Meadows turned into a standoff, how one man's sanctuary became a war zone, we have to rewind the clock 6 months. Back to the day Jack Callahan thought he'd finally found a place to call home. 6 months earlier, Serenity Meadows lived up to its name, at least on the surface. The winding streets were named after gentle birds. Robin Road, Sparrow Lane, Bluebird Way. Each house was a variation of the same safe, pleasant architectural design, with carpets of green lawn and identical white picket fences. It was the epitome of the suburban American dream, a place engineered for a sense of safety, order, and predictability. For Jack Callahan, predictability sounded like heaven. After 15 years in the Army Rangers, with tours in places where chaos was the air you breathed, boredom was a luxury. He was a lawyer now, running a small but fierce nonprofit that offered pro bono legal counsel to struggling veterans. He'd seen his brothers-in-arms fight enemies overseas, only to come home to a different kind of war, one against red tape, benefits issues, and sometimes the demons in their own minds. The house he bought was at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. It had a large, slightly overgrown backyard, exactly what he was looking for. Standing there on that first day, breathing in the smell of cut grass and damp earth, he could see it. Not just a yard, but a purpose. He was going to build something here. A small guest house, a retreat, a place where a fellow vet who was struggling could come, stay for a few weeks, breathe, and get his feet back under him without the pressure of the outside world. A sanctuary, he called it in his head. He'd researched all the city ordinances, the zoning laws, and even the Homeowners Association covenants before he bought the place. The guest house was permissible, as long as it met certain size and setback criteria. Jack planned everything meticulously, ensuring his build was not just compliant, but over-compliant. For the first few weeks, Jack was a picture of productivity. He did most of the work himself. The neighbors would see him out there from sunup, his lean, wiry frame moving with a purposeful efficiency. He poured the foundation, raised the frame, and set the beams with a precision that only comes from someone used to staking his life on attention to detail. It was during this time that he met his first neighbors. The first was Mr. Miller, an elderly man with a kindly face and a gardener's hands who lived next door. He was often out tending to his prize-winning roses. "Howdy, young fella," Mr. Miller called out, his voice warm. "Building something big there?" Jack wiped the sweat from his brow. "Hello, sir. Yes, sir. A small guest house." "A place for the mother-in-law, eh?" Mr. Miller joked, a twinkle in his eye. Jack chuckled. "Not exactly. It's for some old friends of mine, guys from the service. Just a place for them to decompress for a bit when they need it." Mr. Miller's expression softened. "That's a noble thing, son. A real noble thing. Just be careful with the HOA. They can be a bit particular." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "They measure grass height, you know, with a ruler." Jack nodded, appreciating the warning. "I read the bylaws. I think I have everything covered." "Good. Good," Mr. Miller said, turning back to his roses. "Just hate to see a good man get into any trouble." A few days later, he had his first encounter with Carolyn Beaumont. She wasn't the HOA president yet, just another resident. She was walking her perfectly groomed white poodle, an animal that looked as tense and pampered as its owner. She paused at the edge of Jack's property, looking at the half-finished construction with a distasteful frown. "You're making quite a bit of noise," she observed. Her voice had none of Mr. Miller's warmth. It was cool and clipped. "My apologies for the disturbance, ma'am," Jack said politely. "I try to wrap up any loud work by 5 p.m. "See that you do," she said, her icy blue eyes scanning the piles of lumber and tools. "And your truck. It's dripping a bit of oil on the street. The HOA has very strict rules about that." Jack glanced at his truck, then at the spotless pavement. There wasn't a drop of oil. "I'll double-check it, ma'am. Thanks for the heads up." She didn't reply, just gave a small sniff and tugged her dog along. As Jack watched her walk away, he had a vague sense of unease. It was the contrast between the neighborhood's perfect facade and the tension simmering just beneath it. Like walking through a minefield disguised as a field of flowers. He was used to minefields. What he didn't know was that he was living next door to the person who was about to become the detonator. TIANGANH. A few months passed, and Jack's project took shape. The guest house was no longer a wooden skeleton, but a solid, handsome little structure. He'd put on the roof, installed the windows, and was in the process of finishing the interior. The smell of fresh pine and new paint hung in the air, a testament to hours of honest labor. He was hoping to be finished before winter set in. While Jack was busy with hammers and saws, another kind of construction was underway in the neighborhood, the construction of power. The annual HOA presidential election was approaching. The current president, a mild-mannered accountant named Tom, who ran things with a pleasant indifference, had announced he wasn't seeking re-election. That opened up a power, vacuum, and nature, especially human nature, abhors a vacuum. Carolyn Beaumont stepped into that void with the confidence of a general and the grace of a seasoned politician. Her campaign was a masterpiece of suburban warfare. Glossy flyers appeared in mailboxes, featuring a professional headshot of a smiling Carolyn under the slogan, "Protecting our investment, elevating our standards." She hosted tea and talk sessions in her immaculately decorated living room. She spoke persuasively about the dangers of lax compliance, a trash can left out too long, a lawn a little too high, a work truck parked on the street. "These little things," she would say, her voice dropping dramatically, "are how the decline begins. It erodes our property values. It diminishes the serenity we all paid for." Jack saw it from a distance. He got the flyer. He heard the buzz. He even saw the seemingly kind Mr. Miller nodding vigorously at one of Carolyn's impromptu sidewalk gatherings. "She's got the right ideas," Mr. Miller told another neighbor. "We need someone who can keep this place looking sharp." To Jack, her rhetoric sounded hollow and a little alarming, but he wrote it off as typical electioneering. He was too focused on creating his sanctuary to worry about neighborhood politics. It was a mistake he would soon come to regret. The night of the election was held at the community clubhouse, a bland space with folding metal chairs and the faint smell of weak coffee. Only about 30% of the homeowners showed up. Most people, like Jack, were either too busy or simply didn't care. They figured it didn't really matter who ran the HOA. Carolyn gave her speech. She wore a power blue dress, standing tall and confident. She spoke of order, excellence, and fiscal responsibility. She promised to be tough on violators and to ensure Serenity Meadows remained the most desirable community in the area. Her speech was met with polite applause, mostly from a small clique of devoted supporters in the front row. There were no other candidates. The vote was a formality. Carolyn Beaumont won. When Tom, the outgoing president, handed her the small wooden gavel, she took it not like a symbol, but like a weapon. The smile she gave the room seemed to have a new, sharper edge. The change wasn't gradual. It was like a switch had been flipped. The first email from President Beaumont arrived the next morning. The tone was different. Gone was the friendly, neighborly rhetoric of her campaign. It was cold, corporate, and non-negotiable. The email outlined a series of clarifications to the existing rules. Clarification Hasson. All trash and recycling bins were to be stored completely out of sight from the street at all times, with the exception of a 4-hour window on collection day. Violation. $50 fine. Clarification #2. Holiday decorations were now restricted to tasteful and understated displays. Flashing lights, inflatable characters, and anything deemed garish by the architectural committee, newly appointed by Carolyn, were prohibited. Violation. $75 fine. Clarification #3. Weekly lawn maintenance was mandatory. Grass was to be kept between 2 and 3 inches. Edging must be crisp. Weeds were unacceptable. Random inspections would be conducted. Violation. $100 fine. The list went on and on. It was a manifesto of micromanagement. At first, people grumbled quietly. But then, the beige violation envelopes started appearing in mailboxes, and the discontent began to simmer. The first target, The first real victim of the new regime was Mrs. Gable, a widow in her 80s who had lived in her house since before the HOA even existed. Mrs. Gable had a bird feeder in her backyard, a gift from her late husband. For 30 years, it had been a source of simple joy. She received a letter. The bird feeder, it stated, was in violation of a new rule regarding the attraction of pest animals. It was supposedly attracting unapproved bird species, such as starlings and pigeons, instead of the more appropriate finches and cardinals. She was fined $50 and ordered to remove it immediately. Distraught, Mrs. Gable attended the next HOA meeting to appeal. Jack was there too, curious to see the new president in action. It was worse than he imagined. Carolyn sat at the head of the long table, looking like a queen holding court. She listened to Mrs. Gable's trembling explanation with a show of patronizing patience. "Mrs. Beaumont, it's been there for 30 years, Mrs. Gable said, her voice wavering. "My husband, Henry, he made it for me." "Sentiment is understandable, Mrs. Gable," Carolyn interrupted, her voice sickeningly sweet. "However, we cannot let emotions govern our decisions. The rule is clear. The feeder is a liability. It attracts unwanted animals and could lower the property values of your neighbors. But they're just little birds. Today it's little birds. Tomorrow it's raccoons and squirrels. We have to draw a line," Carolyn declared. "The appeal is denied. The fine stands. You have 48 hours to remove the offending property." Mrs. Gable looked as if she'd been slapped. Jack felt a hot surge of anger in his chest. He stood up. "Madam President, this seems incredibly unreasonable." All eyes turned to him. Carolyn's narrowed. "And you are?" "Jack Callahan, 12 Bluebird Way. Finding an 80-year-old woman over a bird feeder doesn't seem like elevating standards. It seems like bullying." A hush fell over the room. Carolyn's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold stone. "You are out of order, Mr. Callahan, and I would advise you to reread your bylaws regarding respect for the board's authority. Sit down." A few days later, Jack received his own beige envelope. It wasn't about the guest house. Not yet. It was about his truck. A grainy, circled photo showed a tiny, dark smudge on the asphalt beneath his engine, the same oil spot Carolyn had mentioned months ago, the one Jack had checked for and never found. The photo looked doctored. "Violation of vehicle fluid leakage ordinance," it read. "Fine. $150. Jack looked at the letter, and then out the window at his nearly finished guest house. It stood there, a symbol of peace and purpose, bathed in the late afternoon Sunday. But a shadow was now falling over it. He realized that meeting wasn't just about Mrs. Gable and her bird feeder. It was a warning. Carolyn Beaumont was building her empire, and she would crush anyone or anything that stood in her way. And his sanctuary, he knew with a sickening certainty, was going to be her next target. Ting Ain. The guest house was finished. Jack closed the front door for the final time, the solid click of the latch echoing in the quiet afternoon air. He stepped back and admired his work. The small structure, with its pale gray siding and crisp white trim, looked like it had always belonged there. Inside, it was ready. A neatly made bed, a fully functional kitchenette, and a comfortable armchair angled by the window overlooking the garden. It radiated a sense of peace. Jack felt a profound sense of pride. This was more than wood and nails. It was a promise kept, a safe harbor created. His satisfaction lasted exactly 24 hours. The next day, the beige envelope was in his mailbox. It was thicker and heavier than the last one. As he opened it, Jack felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck, a familiar sensation from his days learning to spot IEDs. This envelope was a paper bomb. It was from the Serenity Meadows HOA Office of Compliance, and was written in the kind of convoluted legalese designed to intimidate. The heart of it was a single, bolded paragraph. Pursuant to Bylaw 74, C, Amendment 4, passed by the board on the 18th of October, the use of accessory dwelling units for the purpose of transient lodging by non-immediate family members is prohibited. Your structure's intended use, as you have described to other community members, constitutes a direct violation. It went on to list a litany of dire consequences, an initial fine of $1,000, plus $200 for every day the violation continued. He had 10 days to remedy the situation. Remedy, the letter clarified, meant either complete demolition of the structure or its conversion to a non-inhabitable storage shed by removing all plumbing, electricity, and living amenities. Jack read it twice, his initial disbelief quickly hardening into a cold, focused anger. Passed on the 18th of October. That was after he was already 90% complete. This was a targeted strike, thinly veiled in bureaucratic procedure. Carolyn had manufactured a weapon and aimed it directly at the heart of his project. But she'd made a critical mistake. She assumed Jack was like Mrs. Gable, that he would be intimidated and fold. She forgot that Jack wasn't just a soldier. He was a lawyer. He'd built a career out of dismantling this exact kind of bureaucratic nonsense to protect people. And this time, the fight was personal. The next HOA meeting was held in an atmosphere of palpable tension. Word about Jack's guesthouse problem had spread. The room was more crowded than usual. Jack saw Mrs. Gable in the back, looking worried but with a flicker of hope in her eyes. Others were there, too. People who had been on the receiving end of Carolyn's petty fines and arrogant dismissals. They hadn't come to speak. They'd come to watch. They'd come to see if someone was finally going to fight back. Jack arrived prepared. He carried a document folio containing copies of his city building permits, the original HOA bylaws, and dated photographs of the construction progress. He sat quietly until the compliance issue for 12 Bluebird Way was called. Carolyn began. As you all know, the board has identified a serious violation at the Callahan property. While the structure is cosmetically appealing, its intended use violates the spirit and the letter of our community covenants. Serenity Meadows is a single-family community. Madam President, Jack interrupted, his voice calm but carrying easily across the room. I'd like to address the board. Carolyn looked annoyed at being cut off, but in front of an audience, she had little choice. You have 5 minutes. Jack walked to the front. He didn't stand at the residence podium, but before the board's table, placing himself on their level. He set his folio down on the table with a definitive thud. First, he began, let's talk about the letter of the covenants. This is the set of bylaws that was in effect when I purchased my home and filed my building plans. Article 9, Section 2, clearly states that accessory structures under 500 square feet and in compliance with city codes are permitted. My guest house is 480 square feet and passed every single city inspection. Here are the permits. He pushed them across the table. He continued, his voice unwavering. Second, let's talk about the bylaw 74C you're citing. It was passed last month. Under the laws of this state, and indeed this country, HOA rules cannot be applied retroactively. My structure was legally commenced under the rules that existed at the time. It's grandfathered in. It is a fundamental legal principle. A silence fell over the room. Jack had taken what Carolyn tried to frame as an emotional issue of strangers in the neighborhood and turned it into a clear-cut legal lesson. Carolyn shuffled the papers, her composure faltering slightly. But only for a moment. She looked up, a cool smirk playing on her lips. Thank you for your legal lecture, Mr. Callahan. However, you are not the HOA's attorney, and our attorney interprets these matters differently. How so? Jack challenged. That the law doesn't apply in Serenity Meadows? Our counsel advises that the board has the discretion to interpret the spirit of the covenants to protect the character of the community, she said, her tone patronizing. Next to her, a board member named Arthur, a nervous-looking man, nodded weakly. And we interpret your operation of what is essentially a free hotel as being against that spirit. Your city permits are irrelevant here. Our covenants take precedence. It was a ridiculously flawed argument, but Carolyn said it with absolute certainty. Jack realized she wasn't debating the law. She was simply exercising raw power. The facts didn't matter. So, to be clear, Jack said slowly, the board is intentionally ignoring my legal rights based on a spirit that you get to define? The board has voted, Carolyn said dismissively. The matter is settled. The fines stand. You have 9 days. She picked up her gavel. This meeting is adjourned. It was a ridiculously flawed argument, but Carolyn said it with absolute certainty. Jack realized she wasn't debating the law. She was simply exercising raw power. The facts didn't matter. So, to be clear, Jack said slowly, the board is intentionally ignoring my legal rights based on a spirit that you get to define? The board has voted, Carolyn said dismissively. The matter is settled. The fines stand. You have 9 days. She picked up her gavel. This meeting is adjourned. Jack stood there, stunned by the sheer audacity of it. As people began to get up and leave in a murmur of whispers, he felt a hand on his arm. It was Mr. Miller. That was a disgrace, what she did in there, Mr. Miller whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. His kind face was a mask of outrage. She's a tyrant. Jack nodded, still processing. I can't believe this. Listen, son, Mr. Miller said, his voice urgent. Charging at her head-on like this won't work. She controls the board. But she doesn't control all of us. There are others who are just as angry as you are. But they're scared. You need allies. He leaned in closer. Don't let her know your next move. Don't show her all your cards. Let me talk to a few people. Quietly. We have to be smart about this. We can fight her, but we have to do it together. Mr. Miller's words were like a lifeline in a hostile sea. Jack, feeling isolated and besieged, felt a flicker of hope. You think so? I know so, Mr. Miller affirmed, giving Jack's shoulder a reassuring pat. "You trust me. Don't do anything rash. Just give me a few days." As Jack walked out into the cool night air, he looked at his guest house, now the center of a war he never wanted. He felt the weight of the fight ahead, but he no longer felt entirely alone. He had an ally. He had a plan. He had no idea that the snake he'd just been warned about wore the guise of a friendly gardener, and that his trust in Mr. Miller was the most dangerous mistake he could ever make. TIANGANH. For the next week, Jack followed Mr. Miller's advice. He didn't pay the fines, but he also didn't take any legal action. He played the part of the sullen neighbor. Reluctantly complying with the HOA's other petty rules, he made sure his trash cans were put away on time. He double-checked his truck for non-existent oil drips. From the outside, it looked like he'd been cowed, that he was weighing his options. Meanwhile, Mr. Miller Frank, Jack had learned his name was played the role of covert messenger to perfection. He'd strike up conversations with Jack over the fence while gardening, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "I spoke to the Hendersons at number 18, Frank would report, snipping a dead rose. "They just got a $200 fine because their son's basketball hoop was visible from the street. They're furious. They're with us." Another day, it was the Garcia family down the way. Carolyn's giving them hell about the color of their patio awning. They're ready to sign a petition. "Just be patient, Jack. We're building a coalition. We need to present a united front." For Jack, who was used to relying on his team, the strategy made sense. He felt a cautious optimism. He wasn't alone. He had allies. Carolyn might be the queen, but even queens could be toppled if the people rose up. But Jack wasn't one to sit idle. While Frank was assembling his troops, Jack was preparing the ammunition. Each night, after a long day at his nonprofit, he would turn his dining room into a legal war room. The only light was from his desk lamp, illuminating stacks of law books, property documents, and printouts of court precedents involving HOA disputes. He was drafting the legal document that would be the final warning shot before all-out war. It was a sharply worded cease and desist letter. It not only demanded the HOA drop the fines and rescind its threats against the guest house, but it went further. Jack, using his expertise, accused the board of breaching their fiduciary duty, a legal term, meaning they had knowingly acted against the best interests of the members they were obligated to represent. He cited the selective targeting of residents, the creation of arbitrary rules without proper approval, and the misuse of HOA funds for legal fees intended to intimidate homeowners. He demanded a full audit of the HOA's financial records. It was a powerful blow. It didn't just defend his guest house. It challenged Carolyn's entire power base. He knew that when they received this, sent from his nonprofit's legal office for extra weight, the other board members, like the nervous Arthur, would panic. They signed up to pick paint colors, not to face lawsuits that could leave them personally liable. On a Thursday evening, he finished it. He was pleased with his work. Before sending it, he decided to share the good news with his key ally. He called Frank over. "Frank, you have a minute? I think I've figured out how to end this." Frank came inside, wiping his hands on his trousers, his face a mask of supportive concern. Jack spread the documents out on the kitchen table. "This," Jack said, pride evident in his voice. "This is how we hit back." He explained it point by point. The cease and desist, the breach of fiduciary duty accusation, the demand for an audit. When the other board members see that Carolyn is exposing them to real legal trouble, they'll pressure her to back down. "This is the silver bullet. I'm sending it tomorrow morning." Frank scanned the document, his eyes wide. "My goodness, son, you weren't kidding. This is powerful." He looked at Jack, a slow smile spreading across his face. "She won't know what hit her. You've done good, Jack, real good." The next day, Jack woke up feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He was getting ready to send the letter. But before he could leave, a courier knocked on the door, handing him a certified letter. It was from a large, downtown law firm, the one that represented the HOA. His stomach dropped. He tore open the envelope. Inside wasn't another violation notice. It was an official notice of intent to place a lien on his property. The fines, now ballooned to thousands of dollars, were being officially registered as a debt against his house. This meant he couldn't sell or refinance until it was paid. And if it went unpaid, the HOA could begin foreclosure proceedings. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the second paragraph, which read like a direct answer to the letter that no one but him and Frank had seen. "Be advised," it read, "that the board is fully aware of its fiduciary duties. Any legal action alleging a breach of said duties will be considered frivolous and malicious, and will be met with a countersuit for damages and all attendant legal fees." The paper nearly fell from Jack's hand. An icy chill washed over him. How? How could she have known? The exact terminology, the threat of a countersuit. It was a perfect preemptive strike, against the very strategy that only one other person knew, and that person was just across the lawn, meticulously watering his roses. Jack walked out his front door. The letter crumpled in his fist. The world seemed to narrow to the strip of green grass separating the two houses. Every step he took was heavy with a horrifying realization. He didn't stop at the fence. He walked right onto Frank's lawn. Frank looked up, his usual friendly smile on his face. "Morning, Jack. Beautiful day." "She knew," Jack said, his voice low and dangerous. "She knew everything I was going to do." He held up the letter. Jack walked out his front door. The letter crumpled in his fist. The world seemed to narrow to the strip of green grass separating the two houses. Every step he took was heavy with a horrifying realization. He didn't stop at the fence. He walked right onto Frank's lawn. Frank looked up, his usual friendly smile on his face. "Morning, Jack. Beautiful day." "She knew," Jack said, his voice low and dangerous. "She knew everything I was going to do." He held up the letter. "Her lawyer sent this morning. It counters every point in the letter I showed you last night." Frank's smile froze. The color drained from his face. For the first time, Jack saw him not as a kindly neighbor, but as a cornered animal. "Jack, I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't," Jack snarled, his anger finally breaking loose. "Don't you lie to me. It was you and me. So I'll ask you again. How did she know, Frank?" Frank dropped the hose. He took a step back, his facade crumbling. "She had me, son," he mumbled, avoiding Jack's gaze. "My back patio. I built it without approval 10 years ago. She found out. She had the records. Said she'd fine me $50,000 and force a tear down. Or I could help her out. The truth was ugly and worse than anything Jack could have imagined. This whole time, the advice, the warnings, the building of a coalition, it was all a charade. Frank wasn't his ally. He was Carolyn's spy. Said if I just kept her in the loop, Frank continued miserably, she'd make my record clean. I'm sorry, Jack. I didn't have a choice. I can't lose my home. Jack stared at the pathetic man before him, and his rage dissolved into cold contempt. He'd served with men who would die for the person next to them, and here, in Serenity Meadows, a man sold out his neighbor for a patio. He turned his back on Frank. There was nothing more to say. As he walked back to his own yard, he felt a loneliness deeper than anything he'd ever felt in a war zone. The rug had been pulled out from under him. His ally was a traitor. His plan was in ruins. Carolyn wasn't just one step ahead of him. She was playing a different game entirely. Jack stood on his lawn, looking at the guest house. Then he looked at the perfect, orderly houses around him. He realized he wasn't just fighting a woman and a board. He was fighting a network of fear and control, and he was utterly and completely alone. TIING. The silence after the confrontation with Frank was worse than any shouting match could have been. Jack walked back to his empty house, the betrayal a bitter, metallic taste in his mouth. He looked at the notice of lien. It wasn't just a legal document, it was a closing loop. Carolyn had calculated everything. She'd isolated him, discredited him, and now she was moving against his financial foundation. Playing by her rules was a rigged game. Standing in his kitchen, Jack felt a shift happen inside him. The homeowner's sense of violation and anger was dissolving, being replaced by something colder, more familiar. It was the focused calm of a soldier assessing a hostile battlefield. He had been wrong to treat this as a dispute. This wasn't a dispute, it was a campaign, and he was deep in enemy territory with no support. His strategy until now had been defensive, reacting to Carolyn's moves. That ended now. From this moment on, he was on the offensive. He wasn't going to play her game anymore. He was going to redefine the battlefield. A core tenet of the military is to disrupt your enemy's supply lines. For Carolyn, her supplies were money and power. Jack decided he'd start with the money. As an HOA member, he was legally entitled to review the association's financial records. The next morning, he sent a formal, carefully worded email requesting access to all itemized financial statements, bank records, and expenditure reports for the last 2 years. Carolyn's response was as swift as it was predictable. She denied his request, citing privacy concerns and undue administrative burden. Instead, she sent him the glossy annual budget summary, a useless document of broad categories like maintenance, $50,000, and legal fees, $30,000. It was designed to conceal, not to reveal. But in her arrogance, Carolyn had missed one detail. Under the line item for compliance and remediation, there was a massive expenditure, nearly $70,000, paid to a single vendor, Majestic Demolition and Landscaping. Jack thought of the trucks he'd seen around the neighborhood, the ones called in to tear down someone's fence or remove a non-compliant shed. It was always the same company. Jack's pulse quickened. It was a thread. That night, he started pulling on it. Seated at his computer, he dove into the world of online public records. He started with a business search for majestic demolition and landscaping. As he suspected, it was an LLC. The public information was sparse, a registered address that was a P.O. box, and the name of a registered agent he'd never heard of. A dead end. He didn't get discouraged. He tried another approach. He started investigating Carolyn herself. He searched her married name, her maiden name, her past addresses. He looked for known family members. For hours, he found nothing but noise, social media posts from charity galas, articles about her husband's accomplishments, and then he found it. An old business filing from 15 years prior for a failed interior design consultancy. On the filing was her name and a partner, her brother, Gregory Reed. With a new name to search, doors began to open. Jack punched Gregory Reed into the state business database. A list of companies popped up. Most were defunct, but one stood out, Reed Holdings Group, LLC. Jack felt a jolt of adrenaline. He pulled up the documents for Reed Holdings Group. He scanned the list of company officers, and then he saw it. Listed as vice president was none other than Carolyn Beaumont. His heart was hammering in his chest. Now for the connection. He ran a deeper search on Reed Holdings Group, looking for any subsidiaries or other entities it owned. A few minutes later, the result flashed on the screen, and Jack had to laugh. A dry, mirthless sound. Reed Holdings Group was the sole owner of a smaller company, a company called Majestic Demolition and Landscaping. It all clicked into place. This wasn't just abuse of power. It was a self-enrichment scheme. Carolyn, as HOA president, was using the residents' own fee money to hire her family's company to perform compliance work. Every fence torn down, every tree removed, every enforced fine, was putting money directly into her own pocket. It was a blatant conflict of interest, and it was almost certainly illegal. But Jack knew the story went deeper. That $70,000 was a lot, but it wasn't enough to explain the level of Carolyn's ruthlessness. There had to be something else. Using his access to real estate record databases, he started searching the history of homes in Serenity Meadows. Specifically, he searched for HOA foreclosures. He found 4 in the last 3 years. Families who had been drowned in fines and legal fees until they lost their homes. For each one, he tracked the auction records. And a chilling pattern emerged. In all 4 cases, the home had been purchased for significantly less than its market value. And the buyer, all 4 times, was the same entity. Crestview Property Investments, LLC. With a growing sense of dread, Jack ran a search on Crestview Property Investments. He already knew what he was going to find. And there it was. The sole owner of Crestview Property Investments was none other than Reed Holdings Group. The entire, disgusting scheme laid itself bare before him. It was as simple as it was evil. Step 1. Carolyn targets a homeowner, usually a vulnerable one, and buries them in ridiculous fines. Step 2. She uses the HOA's law firm to place a lien and eventually foreclose on the home. Step 3. Her family's shell company, Crestview Investments, buys the house for cheap at auction. Step 4. Her family's other shell company, Majestic Demolition, gets paid by the HOA, with the neighbor's money, to fix up the property. Step 5. They flip the house for a massive profit. It was a perfect, self-funding, predatory machine. Carolyn wasn't just running a neighborhood, she was harvesting it. Jack leaned back from his computer. The room felt colder. He walked over to a whiteboard he used for case notes and began to draw. Names, companies, arrows connecting them. Carolyn Beaumont in the center, her tentacles reaching out to Reed Holdings, Majestic Demolition, and Crestview Investments. It looked like the chart of a criminal organization, because that's exactly what it was. His guest house, Mrs. Gable's bird feeder, the Hendersons' basketball hoop, they weren't the point. They were just instruments to generate revenue and maintain a climate of fear. Jack wasn't a homeowner in a dispute anymore. He was a witness to an ongoing criminal enterprise. He wasn't fighting an HOA president anymore. He was fighting a crime boss. And he knew that for this kind of enemy, he was going to need bigger guns. TIINGANH. The whiteboard in Jack's home office looked like something out of a crime movie. Names, shell companies, lines and arrows forming a web of deceit and greed. It was complex, but its message was terrifyingly simple. Carolyn Beaumont wasn't just a neighborhood tyrant, she was a professional predator. Jack knew a civil suit wouldn't be enough. Suing an HOA could take years and cost tens of thousands of dollars. All the while, Carolyn would keep draining the association's funds to pay her lawyers, and the lien on Jack's house would continue to grow like a malignant tumor. No, this wasn't a civil matter, this was criminal, and criminals were the province of the district attorney. The next morning, he put on a suit, loaded the whiteboard into the back of his truck, and drove to the county DA's office building. It was an imposing tower of granite and glass, built to project the weight of the law. As he sat in the waiting room, Jack felt like he'd crossed an invisible threshold. He was out of the world of manicured lawns and mailbox disputes now. He'd managed to get a meeting with the district attorney herself, Evelyn Reed, a small professional courtesy extended because of his status as a lawyer in the community. Evelyn Reed was a woman in her 50s, with short-cropped dark hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see through any pretense. She had a reputation for being tough, smart, and incredibly busy. She began the meeting with an air of polite impatience. "Mr. Callahan," she said, glancing at her watch, "I have 15 minutes. I've reviewed your summary. An HOA dispute, is that correct? Frankly, my office prosecutes felonies, not fence height regulations." Jack nodded calmly. "I understand, Madam DA, but what if I could show you that this HOA is a front for an organized fraud and money laundering operation?" Evelyn Reed's eyes sharpened. "That's a strong accusation. You'd better have proof." "I do," Jack said. He turned the whiteboard around. "If I may, for the next 10 minutes, Jack laid out the entire thing, not as an angry homeowner, but as a lawyer presenting a case. "But what if I could show you that this HOA is a front for an organized fraud and money laundering operation?" Evelyn Reed's eyes sharpened. "That's a strong accusation. You'd better have proof." "I do," Jack said. He turned the whiteboard around. "If I may, for the next 10 minutes, Jack laid out the entire thing, not as an angry homeowner, but as a lawyer presenting a case. He explained the predatory fines, the creation of the shell companies, the family connection between Carolyn and those companies, and the pattern of foreclosures and property flipping. He pointed to the names, the flow of money, the undeniable coincidences. When he finished, Evelyn Reed's impatience was completely gone. She was leaning forward, her eyes fixed on the whiteboard. She was silent for a long moment, tapping a single finger on her desk. "Mr. Callahan," she said finally, her voice low and serious. "This pattern, it's disturbingly familiar." She stood up and walked to her office door. "Please give me a moment." She stepped outside, closing it behind her. Jack sat in the silence of the powerful office, his heart pounding. He'd gambled everything on this move. 10 minutes later, Evelyn Reed returned. Her expression had changed. Her professional interest had been replaced by a cold intensity. She didn't sit down. "My office, along with our federal partners, has been tracking an alarming trend for the past 2 years, she began. Complaints of HOA abuse have skyrocketed across the state. Many of them share similarities: shell corporations, aggressive tactics. We suspected it was coordinated, but we never had a clean blueprint of how one of these cells operated from the inside. Until now." She paused. "Are you familiar with the RICO Act, Mr. Callahan?" Jack nodded. "The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. A law designed to fight organized crime." "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Because what you've outlined here isn't just fraud. It has all the hallmarks of a racketeering enterprise. And because these real estate deals involve federally insured banks and wire transfers across state lines, it's no longer just in my jurisdiction." Just then, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," Evelyn Reed said. The door opened, and a man in a plain, well-fitting suit entered. He had the look of someone who could blend into any crowd, yet he radiated a quiet confidence and authority. "Mr. Callahan," Reed said, "this is Special Agent Davies from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agent Davies, this is the gentleman I spoke to you about on the phone." Agent Davies shook Jack's hand. His grip was firm. "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. Callahan. We're grateful you brought this to light." Jack felt like he was falling into a different reality. "The FBI? What you've uncovered," Davies said, his voice even and matter-of-fact, "is much bigger than one suburban neighborhood. Mrs. Beaumont isn't the queen, Mr. Callahan. She's a regional manager." Davies went on to explain. A national criminal syndicate had realized that HOAs were a near-perfect vehicle for money laundering and real estate fraud. They were poorly regulated, held significant power, and had a steady stream of income from fees. They had developed a franchise kit, a business model for taking over HOA boards, changing the bylaws, and beginning the same process of predatory foreclosure that Jack had discovered. Carolyn Beaumont and her brother, Gregory Reed, run one of their most successful franchises, Davies explained. "What you've given us is the first piece of direct evidence that connects an individual to the entire top-to-bottom structure. You've given us an inside man." Jack looked from Davies to Reed. "So, what now?" "Now we build an unbreakable case," Reed said. "And we need your help. We need you to be our confidential informant, Mr. Callahan," Agent Davies added. "We need you to go back there and act like you're losing. Let the fines pile up. Act desperate. Let her believe she has you cornered. We want to catch her in the act of taking the final step. The danger of the situation crashed down on Jack. This was no longer one man's fight against a bureaucracy. He was now an asset in a federal investigation against a dangerous criminal organization. This syndicate, are they violent? Jack asked, his mind immediately going to the safety of the veteran friends he hoped to host. Agent Davies's gaze was serious. They aren't contract killers, but they have been known to go to great lengths to protect their interests. Witness intimidation, property damage. It's not off the table. You'll have protection, but you need to understand the risks. As Jack drove home that afternoon, the familiar streets of Serenity Meadows looked alien. The carefully cultivated perfection now seemed sinister. Every closed door, every drawn blind, seemed to be hiding a secret. His neighborhood wasn't a community, it was a crime scene. He pulled into his driveway and looked at the guest house, the source of it all. This fight was no longer about saving it. It was about taking back the entire neighborhood and, maybe, stopping the same thing from happening to countless others. The weight of what he'd just agreed to settled on his shoulders. He wasn't alone anymore, but the fight had just become infinitely more dangerous. He had powerful allies, but the enemy was a many-headed beast, far bigger and uglier than he had ever imagined. Ty-Ng-A-N-H. Returning to Serenity Meadows from that life-altering meeting was like stepping through a portal into a parallel reality. Everything looked the same, the green lawns, the perfect houses, but Jack now saw it all through a different lens. His neighborhood was no longer his home. It was an operational zone. His neighbors weren't just neighbors. They were civilians, potential threats, or unwitting victims. Jack's life became a calculated performance. He had a handler, Agent Davies, whom he communicated with via a burner phone. His orders were clear. Present the image of a broken man. The transformation started subtly. Jack, who had taken immense pride in his perfectly edged lawn, now let it grow a fraction too long, just enough to breach the 3-inch rule. A few dandelions began to pop up near the walkway. For a ranger, for whom discipline was second nature, this deliberate sloppiness was a minor psychological torture. Every time he saw the weeds, he felt an uncomfortable twitch, but he fought it down. The mission was more important. He began to look tired. He let the dark circles under his eyes show. He stopped his morning runs. When he walked to the mailbox, his shoulders were slumped. If he saw Carolyn out and about, he would avoid her gaze and hurry back inside. Carolyn, predictably, reveled in it. She saw Jack's apparent decline as a validation of her absolute power. Her confrontations were no longer public declarations. They were small, venomous little stabs. Finding it a bit hard to keep up with things, Mr. Callahan? She called across the street one afternoon, a sickly sweet smile plastered on her face. Jack just mumbled something and went inside. The beige envelopes kept coming, each more threatening than the last. Final notice. Immediate payment required. The total, with daily penalties, had climbed past $15,000. It was a ludicrous figure, designed to crush a person's will. The FBI had assured him these fees would be nullified, but seeing it on paper still made his stomach clench. Meanwhile, Jack secretly met with Agent Davies every 2 weeks. They would rendezvous in anonymous places, a grocery store parking lot 2 towns over, a back booth in a cheap diner. "She's taking the bait," Davies said at one meeting, after Jack recounted Carolyn's behavior. "Her arrogance is going to be her downfall. She needs to believe she's completely beaten you. That's what will make her careless." At their next meeting, Davies handed Jack a small object. It looked like an ordinary car key fob. "This is a digital audio recorder. It's got an excellent microphone. The lock button is record, the unlock button is stop. We need you to try and get a conversation on tape. Don't try to get her to confess to murder. Just let her talk. Let her gloat. Act desperate. Ask her if there's any way to save your house. See what she says about the future of the property." This assignment unnerved Jack more than any of the meetings. It was one thing to act. It was another to deliberately engage in a confrontation with the goal of intelligence gathering. He got his chance the following Tuesday. He saw Carolyn supervising a landscaping crew as they changed out the seasonal flowers at the neighborhood entrance. She stood in her familiar pose, arms crossed, watching them like a general surveying her troops. Jack's heart hammered. He pressed the lock button on the fob in his pocket. Taking a deep breath, he put on the face of a man with nothing left to lose and approached. "Mrs. Beaumont?" he called out, making sure to let his voice sound shaky. She turned, a look of annoyance on her face at being disturbed. When she saw it was Jack, that look morphed into one of smug satisfaction. "Mr. Callahan, what can I do for you?" "Please," he began, taking a step closer. "I'm here to beg. These fines, as they're out of control. It's over $15,000. They're going to take my house. There has to be some way." Carolyn looked at him coldly, clearly savoring every second of his humiliation. Consequences are a part of life, Mr. Callahan. You should have thought of that before you decided the rules didn't apply to you. But it's everything I have, he lied, letting desperation creep into his voice. Isn't there a payment plan? Anything? Carolyn's smile turned sharp. That ship has sailed. Our community has a very efficient process for dealing with distressed properties. It ensures the neighborhood's value isn't compromised by unsightly situations. This was it. Jack pushed a little more. Distressed properties? You mean like a bank auction? Carolyn let out a small, ugly laugh. Oh, it's much quicker than that. Our partners at Crestview Investments ensure these situations are resolved swiftly. They already have a lovely design in mind for your lot once that shed of yours is gone. It will be a vast improvement. A jolt went through Jack. She'd said the name. She'd admitted to a pre-existing plan for his property before any legal foreclosure was complete. It was proof of intent. He nodded miserably. I see. He turned away, not wanting to stay a second longer lest he break character. And Mr. Callahan, Carolyn called after him, as a final shot. Next time, cut your grass. It's a disgrace. Jack didn't respond. He just kept walking, his hand in his pocket clutching the key fob. His heart was beating like a drum. He had it. He had her. That night, he met Davies in a darkened parking lot and handed over the fob. They listened to the recording in the silence of the car. When it finished, Davies gave a slow nod. Perfect, he said. She connected the HOA to Crestview and admitted intent to take your property. This is what we needed. He looked at Jack. You did good, Jack. Real good. This phase is over. So what's next? Jack asked, feeling a wave of exhaustion and relief. Now, Davies said, we wait for her to make the final move. She'll send the official notice for the demolition soon. When she does, we'll be ready. Returning home, Jack found another beige envelope waiting. This one looked different. It was certified mail from the HOA's law firm. He opened it with steady hands. It was a notice to cure violation. It gave him 14 days to completely demolish the guest house. If, at the end of 14 days, the structure was still standing, the HOA would hire outside contractors to remedy the violation at the homeowner's expense. The endgame had a date. The trap was set. All that was left was for the fox to walk into it, and Jack knew that the next 14 days would be the longest of his life. Ty NGNH. The 14-day countdown passed in a fever dream. To the outside world, Jack Callahan was a ghost of his former self. He rarely left his house. When he did, he seemed to have a dark cloud hanging over him. His defeat was total. At least, that's what he needed Carolyn to believe. In reality, Jack had never been more alert. Each day was an exercise in restraint and observation. He noted the license plates of unfamiliar cars that drove slowly past his house. He logged Carolyn's schedule when she left, when she returned, her brief curbside meetings with other board members. He maintained daily contact with Agent Davies via coded texts, reporting nothing out of the ordinary. He was a soldier on a long reconnaissance mission, waiting for the signal to move. While Jack was playing the part of the prey, the FBI was digging deeper than ever into the life of Carolyn Beaumont. With the evidence from the recording, they had probable cause to subpoena records that were previously inaccessible. They were building not just a criminal case, but a psychological portrait of their adversary. On day 10 of the countdown, Jack received a text. Meet at the secondary location, 2,000 hours. Urgent. That night, in a sterile, windowless conference room in a government office building, Agent Davies was waiting for him. Davies's expression was grim. Jack, we found something, Davies began, forgoing any pleasantries. We got her divorce records unsealed, from 20 years ago. It wasn't pretty. Davies slid a file across the table. Her ex-husband's name was Daniel Palmer. He was a Marine, served 2 tours in Mogadishu. Came back with a bad case of PTSD at a time when not many people were talking about it. Jack listened, a sense of unease growing in his gut. According to the documents, Davies continued, Carolyn described her husband as a drain, emotionally unstable, and an embarrassment. She fought tooth and nail in the divorce to make sure he didn't get a cent of their family assets. She succeeded. Daniel Palmer walked away with almost nothing. Jesus, Jack whispered. It gets worse, Davies said, looking Jack straight in the eye. After the divorce, Palmer struggled. He lost his job, couldn't hold an apartment. He was on the verge of homelessness. In a last-ditch effort, he went to a small nonprofit that offered free legal support for veterans. Agent Davies paused to let the words sink in. That organization took his case. They sued his former employer for disability, discrimination, and won. They helped him secure his VA benefits. They essentially saved his life. Davies slid another piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of an old letter. At the top was a faded logo. Jack didn't even have to read it. He recognized it instantly. It was the old logo of the organization he now ran. This was the final twist. The Veterans Advocacy Group, Jack read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. He felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. The one and only, Davies confirmed. Your organization's founder, your predecessor, handled the case personally. The file shows that you, as a junior lawyer at the time, assisted on the research. Carolyn Beaumont knows exactly who your organization is, Jack. She went up against it in court 20 years ago, and she lost. All the pieces suddenly clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. Carolyn's immediate hostility, her obsessive focus on the guest house, her cruelty, and her obvious pleasure in trying to ruin him. This was never just about money or power. This was a deep, rotten, personal vendetta. To Carolyn, Jack was the living embodiment of a past she despised. He represented the system that had taken her failed husband's side against her. His guest house, a sanctuary for soldiers, just like her ex-husband, wasn't just a rule violation. It was a personal affront to everything she believed. Tearing it down wasn't a business decision. It was an exorcism. She was trying to erase a stain from her personal history with bulldozers and court orders. The anger in Jack was a cold fire. He'd seen prejudice against veterans before, but this was venomous. He thought he was fighting greed. He was wrong. He was fighting hate. That explains everything, Jack said, his voice hard. The viciousness. It never made sense. It gives us a powerful motive to present to a jury, Davies said. It turns this from a financial scheme into a hate crime, at least morally. And it makes her more dangerous because it's not entirely rational. Davies leaned forward. The waiting is almost over. This morning, Majestic Demolition filed for a city permit to demolish an unauthorized accessory structure at your address. They've scheduled it for 2 days from now. Friday, Jack said. Friday at 0900 hours, Davies confirmed. Our teams will be in position before dawn. We'll have agents posing as city workers, land surveyors, and new neighbors. We'll have a drone in the air. Every angle will be covered. He handed Jack a small device, like a lapel pin. This is a silent panic button. If anything goes sideways, if you feel you're in real danger, press it. But Jack, I need you to understand. Your job on Friday is simple. Do nothing. Let them come. Let Carolyn come. Let her feel her victory. We need her to give that final order. When she says tear it down or words to that effect, that's when we move. Jack nodded, his mind clear. Carolyn's personal motive changed everything. This fight wasn't just for justice for Serenity Meadows anymore. It was for Daniel Palmer, and for every veteran who had ever been called a burden or been cast aside. He went home that night with a strange sense of peace. The anxiety of the wait was gone, replaced by a steely certainty. He went into the guest house, turned on a lamp, and sat in the armchair. He looked around the quiet, clean space, a place built for healing and hope. On Friday morning, it would become a trap, and Jack was ready to spring it. Ting. Friday morning arrived with an almost cinematic clarity. The sky was cloudless, and the sun cast warm, golden stripes across the dewy lawns of Serenity Meadows. It was a cruelly beautiful morning, a perfect peace before a manufactured storm. Jack was awake before dawn. He wasn't nervous. Instead, he felt an immense calm, the quiet stillness of a soldier before hour. He had done everything he could. He had gathered the intel, he had trusted his chain of command, and now he just had to hold his position. He made a cup of coffee, stood by his kitchen window, and watched his neighborhood wake up. He saw it, the small details a casual observer would miss. A utility van parked at an odd angle down the street, with 2 men sitting inside doing nothing. A land survey crew setting up their equipment on the corner of the park, though no construction was planned. A jogger he'd never seen before, running in place at the end of the cul-de-sac, a tiny earpiece nestled in his ear. The stage was set. The actors were in place. At 8:45 a.m., sharp, the first sound of the assault came. It was the heavy growl of a diesel engine. A flatbed truck turned into the cul-de-sac, carrying the massive yellow bulldozer. The metal behemoth was lowered onto the street with a resounding thud, leaving black scuff marks on the perfect asphalt. A Majestic Demolition pickup truck followed it. 5 minutes later, the 2 local police cruisers arrived, lights off. They parked at a respectful distance. The officers got out, looking bored. To them, this was just another tedious peacekeeping gig. And then, at 9 a.m. on the dot, the Queen's silver Mercedes glided to a stop. Carolyn Beaumont emerged, looking more like she was attending a ribbon-cutting ceremony than a demolition. She wore a power red suit, her blonde hair perfectly in place. She nodded to the police officers, then strode over to the demolition crew's foreman handing him a clipboard. She was the center of her own universe, completely unaware that she was under the microscope of a federal operation. High above, an FBI drone was feeding a live image to a command center. Jack took a deep breath. It was time. He opened his front door and stepped onto his porch, his hands loose at his sides. He wasn't defiant, just present. A man on his own ground. Carolyn turned and saw him. A triumphant, vicious smile spread across her face. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the final subjugation of her enemy. She strode across Jack's lawn, the police officers and the foreman in her wake. She stopped at the foot of his porch steps. "This is what happens when you don't comply, Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice ringing in the quiet morning air. "Rules are rules. Our community has standards." Jack looked her dead in the eye, keeping his voice level. "Your standards, Mrs. Beaumont, are not the law." A flash of raw anger crossed her face, her personal hatred for him breaking through her composed facade. His defiance, even in the face of his apparent defeat, infuriated her. "Oh, we'll see about that," she said through gritted teeth. She whirled around to the foreman. "I've had enough of this. Tear it down. Now." Those were the words agents all over the cul-de-sac had been waiting to hear. Before the foreman could even signal the bulldozer operator, another voice cut through the air. "FBI, nobody move." Chaos erupted. The utility van surged forward. Its back doors flew open, and agents in black tactical vests poured out. The survey crew dropped their equipment and drew their weapons. The jogger was now directing traffic, blocking the exit to the cul-de-sac. Unmarked black SUVs materialized from nowhere, converging on the scene. The local police officers were stunned. They instinctively put their hands on their weapons, but were immediately overridden by the federal agents. Local PD. "Stand down. This is a federal operation." Carolyn Beaumont's face was a portrait in transformation. Triumph turned to confusion, confusion to disbelief, and disbelief to pure, abject horror, as she realized the trap wasn't for Jack, it was for her. Through the controlled chaos, Agent Davies and DA Evelyn Reed strode forward. Davies directed his teams to detain the demolition crew for questioning. Evelyn Reed made a beeline for Carolyn. What the hell is happening?" Carolyn stammered, her composure shattering. "I am the president of this HOA." "Not anymore," Evelyn Reed said coldly. She produced a pair of handcuffs. "Carolyn Beaumont, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, money laundering, and racketeering." Carolyn's eyes widened in horror as Reed grabbed her wrist and pulled it behind her back. The click of the handcuffs was like a thunderclap in her silent world. "You can't do this," she shrieked, her composure finally cracking into panicked rage. "You have no idea who I am. I'll sue you." "Feel free to add it to your list of legal expenses," Reed said, deadpan, as she began to lead the struggling Carolyn towards an unmarked car. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, were now out of their houses, staring in stunned silence. Mrs. Gable stood on her porch, her hand to her mouth, tears in her eyes. Mr. Miller peeked through his blinds, his face ashen with fear. As Carolyn was marched across the lawn, her eyes met Jack's. He was still standing on his porch, calm and quiet. In that moment, she understood. The decline, the desperation, it was all an act. She wasn't the hunter. She was the prey. They pushed her into the back of a vehicle. The door slammed shut, cutting off her furious curses. Through the glass, Jack could see her face, twisted in a mask of impotent rage. As the car carrying Carolyn drove away, a strange quiet fell over the cul-de-sac, broken only by the squawk of FBI radios. Jack looked at his guest house, standing untouched, bathed in the morning Sunday. Then he looked at the scene of federal agents, confused cops, and shocked neighbors. The war was over. The silence in his mind, for the first time in months, was absolute. He had held his position, and justice had come to Serenity Meadows. Tinganh. The fall of Carolyn Beaumont's empire was swift and total. In the hours after the raid, FBI agents executed warrants on Carolyn's home, her brother's office, and the headquarters of Reed Holdings Group. They carried out boxes of computers, financial records, and incriminating documents. The web she had so carefully built over years was dismantled in a single morning. News spread through Serenity Meadows like wildfire. The fear that had gripped the neighborhood was replaced by a mixture of shock and exhilaration. Neighbors who once only shared furtive nods now gathered on their lawns, swapping stories of Carolyn's petty tyranny. It turned out, almost everyone had a story, a fine for a cracked paving stone, a threat over the color of their flower pots. The spell was broken. The other dominoes fell quickly. Facing federal charges, Mr. Miller cooperated completely, detailing his role as a spy and what he knew of Carolyn's operation. The other board members, like Arthur, also rushed to cooperate, each claiming to be a victim of Carolyn's manipulation and intimidation. The trial of the United States versus Beaumont and Reed became statewide news. It exposed how a sophisticated criminal enterprise had weaponized the very idea of community against its own residents. The evidence Jack had gathered was central to the case. His testimony, calm and precise, painted an undeniable picture of corruption and greed. In the end, the verdict was delivered. Gregory Reed, Carolyn's brother, was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Carolyn Beaumont, as the mastermind and face of the operation, received a heavier sentence. The judge, in his sentencing, did not mince words. "You took a position of trust," the judge said, looking directly at Carolyn, "and turned it into a weapon of extortion. You preyed upon your neighbors and eroded the very fabric of the community you swore to protect. This court sentences you to 18 years in a federal correctional facility." Justice had been served. But the work in Serenity Meadows was just beginning. The neighborhood was wounded. The HOA was bankrupted by Carolyn's legal fees and now leaderless. In that void, something extraordinary happened. The residents stepped up. They organized their own meetings, this time not in fear, but in cooperation. Jack, asked to serve as an advisor, helped them draft a new set of bylaws, one with term limits, requirements for financial transparency, and a fair appeals process. They elected a new board, comprised of people like Mrs. Gable, whose quiet wisdom was now celebrated, and the Hendersons, who just wanted their kid to have a safe place to play basketball. Serenity Meadows began to heal. Laughter returned to the backyards. A block party was held. People painted their mailboxes whatever color they wanted. A few months after the trial, Jack's guest house finally welcomed its first guest. He was a young Marine sergeant, struggling with his transition back to civilian life. As Jack showed him inside the quiet, clean space, the Marine looked around, his eyes misting over slightly. "This place, it's peaceful," he said. "That's the idea," Jack replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Welcome home, brother." Standing there, watching the guest house finally fulfill its mission, Jack realized his ordeal had taught him something. The problem wasn't just in Serenity Meadows. As Jack showed him inside the quiet, clean space, the Marine looked around, his eyes misting over slightly. "This place, it's peaceful," he said. "That's the idea," Jack replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Welcome home, brother." Standing there, watching the guest house finally fulfill its mission, Jack realized his ordeal had taught him something. The problem wasn't just in Serenity Meadows. How many other communities were out there, suffering under petty tyrants? How many other military families, already under stress, were being pushed to the brink by predatory fines? With a new energy, Jack took his nonprofit to the next level. He used the media attention from the case to launch a new, national initiative, the Homefront Foundation. Its mission was simple: to defend military families and veterans from abusive and predatory HOAs across the country. He had turned his personal battle into a crusade for thousands. 1 year after that fateful morning, Jack sat on his front porch, sipping an iced tea. The guest house was occupied, another veteran finding peace inside. His lawn was cut to a height of his choosing. The air was filled with the sound of kids playing down the street. The neighborhood was no longer eerily silent. It was alive. He had faced an enemy who had weaponized the idea of community. But in the end, it was a real community, one built on respect, kindness, and resilience that had won. His sanctuary had not only survived, it had flourished, and it had taught him the ultimate lesson, that sometimes the best way to protect your home is to fight for everyone's right to call a place home.